June 4, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. Unteroffizier Hermann Böttcher gripped the railing of the ship as he stepped down the gangplank, his legs still shaky after 14 days crossing the Atlantic. Through the thin haze of the morning, he saw something that contradicted 3 years of Nazi propaganda. American dockworkers, both white and black, worked side by side with machines that seemed to belong to another century. Women wearing coveralls operated cranes. Children sold newspapers outside the gates. No one ran at the sight of enemy uniforms. "Die Spinnen, die Amerikaner," he whispered to the man behind him. "The Americans are crazy." Böttcher later recorded this moment in his memoir Behind Barbed Wire, published in Germany in 1952, one of the most detailed accounts of POW life in the United States. The Norfolk base stretched across 4,300 acres. Its docks ran farther than the eye could see, its cranes loading and unloading dozens of ships at once. In a single morning, this one port handled more tonnage than Hamburg processed in an entire week. Yet it was not the size that shocked the arriving prisoners. It was the normality. Civilians walked freely near military facilities. Vendors sold coffee and donuts within sight of warships. A brass band played popular music at a nearby war bond rally. 2,500 veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps stood in formation on American soil, the first major group of what would become 425,000 German prisoners held in the United States by the end of the war. What they would witness in the months ahead would not simply be American abundance. That story has already been told. They would encounter something far more disturbing to the military mind. A nation at war that refused to behave like one. A society so confident in its strength that it treated mortal enemies like troublesome guests, and a people whose unusual customs and baffling behavior would ultimately damage Nazi ideology more than any battlefield defeat. The processing at Norfolk began with what Böttcher later described as the first impossibility. German military doctrine, practiced from Poland to France to Africa, taught that prisoners were either resources to exploit or burdens to reduce. The Geneva Convention was observed when convenient and ignored when necessary. Yet here American officers read the Geneva Convention rules aloud in fluent German. They explained rights. They asked about dietary needs. According to International Red Cross records from June 1943, Jewish American personnel, including several sergeants with clearly Jewish surnames, distributed Red Cross packages while explaining that kosher meals were available for Jewish prisoners. Several Wehrmacht soldiers laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke. It was not. The American military had prepared for the religious dietary requirements of its enemies. The medical examinations also defied military logic. German prisoners with wounds received the same penicillin, that miracle drug barely available in German field hospitals, as American soldiers. Swiss Red Cross Inspector Guy Matro wrote in his July 1943 report, "Medical treatment provided to German prisoners equals or exceeds that given to American military personnel. Prisoners expressed disbelief at the quality of care." African American medical personnel served in integrated units at Norfolk, although the entire military was not yet integrated. One documented incident involved a black medical technician drawing blood from Wehrmacht officers for routine health screening. In Germany, such racial contact was strictly forbidden by law. Here it was ordinary military procedure. The most incomprehensible sight came during their first meal. German prisoners were escorted to a mess hall where American sailors were already eating. The two groups, enemies who had tried to destroy each other in convoy battles, ate inside the same building. Americans sat at one end, Germans at the other, using the same food lines and receiving the same quality meals. The Americans showed little interest. Most were focused on a radio broadcast of a baseball game rather than the enemies sitting 50 feet away. The 3-day train journey to camps in the interior created an even greater sense of cognitive dissonance. Unlike the secretive prisoner transports inside Germany, American authorities made no effort to conceal the POWs. The trains were not boxcars but regular passenger coaches with padded seats. They stopped at ordinary stations where civilians gathered to watch. At Union Station in Washington, D.C., witnessed by hundreds and recorded in station logs from June 1943, German prisoners observed American families saying goodbye to soldiers departing for training camps. Wives kissed their husbands openly. Children waved flags. Teenagers drank milkshakes at the station restaurant. The same platform hosted both enemies and families, separated only by windows and guards who seemed more interested in directing traffic than watching prisoners. The trains passed through industrial districts that, by German standards, should have been hidden or camouflaged. Instead, factories displayed their names in enormous letters. The Glenn L. Martin aircraft plant in Baltimore had parking lots visible from the railway, filled with workers' personal automobiles. Prisoners could count the B-26 bombers lined up awaiting delivery. There was no attempt at concealment, no obsession with secrecy, just American industry operating openly in front of enemy eyes. Through Pennsylvania, the trains passed coal mines and steel mills running day and night. The night sky glowed orange from blast furnaces that never shut down. Workers, housing, individual homes with gardens rather than barracks, spreading for miles around each industrial center. Electric lights glowed in every window. Radio antennas rose from nearly every rooftop. At a stop in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, documented in Pennsylvania Railroad records, German officers watched American laborers changing shifts. Men carried lunchboxes, wore leather shoes and wristwatches, and drove their own cars. According to Böttcher's memoir, one worker tossed away a half-eaten apple and casually took a fresh one from his lunchbox. The effortless waste of food by a common worker stunned officers who had watched their soldiers fight over scraps in North Africa. Camp Hearn, Texas, opened in December 1942 on 720 acres near the town of Hearn in Robertson County. Military records show it would house up to 4,800 German prisoners in conditions superior to what many had known as civilians. The camp's construction and operation are thoroughly documented in Army Corps of Engineers files and War Department records preserved in the National Archives. The infrastructure itself challenged German assumptions about prisoner treatment. Wooden barracks with electric lighting instead of oil lamps. Indoor plumbing with flush toilets and hot water heaters in every building. Individual beds with mattresses, sheets, and blankets instead of straw pallets. Recreation halls equipped with ping-pong tables, musical instruments, and libraries. Swiss Inspector Emil Sandstrom wrote in his August 1943 report, "Conditions at Camp Hearn exceed not only Geneva Convention requirements but surpass living conditions many of these men experienced in Germany." The camp commander, Lieutenant Colonel Cecil Stiles, whose service record remains preserved in military archives, addressed the arriving prisoners in German. He had studied the language at university before the book. He explained camp regulations, but also something entirely unexpected. Prisoners would largely govern themselves inside the compounds. They would elect representatives, organize activities, and manage their own schedules within military regulations. Self-government for captured enemies seemed either a sign of weakness or perhaps a trap. The camp hospital, inspected monthly by the International Red Cross, contained equipment many German civilian hospitals lacked: X-ray machines, surgical facilities, dental chairs, and pharmaceutical supplies including the new miracle drug penicillin. When prisoner Georg Gärtner, who would later become famous as the last German POW to surrender in 1985, developed appendicitis in September 1943, he received surgery within hours. The operation was performed by Captain William Calhoun, an Army surgeon from Dallas, assisted by German POW medical staff. But nothing prepared them for the camp canteen, a store where prisoners could buy goods using script earned from voluntary work. Cigarettes, chocolate, soap, writing materials, musical instruments, art supplies. The War Department authorized these sales, documented in Quartermaster Corps records, believing that small comforts would maintain morale and reduce escape attempts. The idea that captured enemies could shop, could make choices, could obtain items beyond simple survival unsettled traditional military thinking. By September 1943, severe labor shortages led to POW employment across Texas. The War Manpower Commission, working with the Provost Marshal General's office, authorized prisoner labor in agriculture and certain non-military industries. Prisoners earned 80 cents per day in canteen script, the same base pay as American privates. Detailed documentation of these work programs survives in National Archives Record Group 389. At the King Ranch near Kingsville, Texas, German POWs encountered American agriculture on a scale beyond European understanding. The ranch covered 825,000 acres, larger than the entire state of Rhode Island. Ranch records from 1943 to 1945 show that German prisoners worked alongside Mexican-American vaqueros and some black ranch workers in cattle operations. The racial mixture in labor, though socially limited, contradicted Nazi racial hierarchy theories. Prisoners recorded their astonishment at mechanization in letters that passed military censorship. A single combine harvester replaced dozens of workers. Trucks, not horse-drawn wagons, transported crops. The ranch even used aircraft, small civilian planes, to survey cattle herds and locate strays. Ranch foreman Richard Clayburgh Jr. treated German POWs more like temporary employees than enemy soldiers, according to ranch employment records. At cotton gins throughout Texas, including documented facilities in Taylor, Caldwell, and Waller counties, POWs witnessed processing speeds unimaginable by European standards. The Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, which employed POW labor from August 1943 to December 1945, processed more cotton in a single day than some German textile mills handled in a month. Yet workers still took regular breaks, ate full meals, and listened to radios while they worked. Productivity achieved through decent treatment rather than harsh discipline contradicted Wehrmacht experience. The prisoners also discovered that American farmers spoke openly about politics. FBI monitoring reports declassified in the 1970s noted that German POWs were astonished to hear farmers criticize President Roosevelt freely, complaining about government policies without fear. In one documented incident at a farm near Bryan, Texas, a farmer told a Department of Agriculture inspector to go to hell during an argument about crop regulations. Allocation disputes. The farmers suffered no punishment. Such open defiance of authority would have meant death in Nazi Germany. Local newspapers across Texas documented interactions between German prisoners and American civilians. The Hearn Democrat, Bryan Daily Eagle, and Temple Daily Telegram all published reports about POW work details and community encounters. These contemporary articles verify social experiences that deeply surprised the captured soldiers. In December 1943, the Hearn Democrat reported that German POWs were taken on supervised Christmas shopping trips, where they witnessed American teenage culture. Young people gathered at drugstore soda fountains, boys and girls together without chaperones. They danced to jukebox music, including jazz and swing, music that Nazi ideology condemned as degenerate, Negro music. They wore fashionable clothes despite wartime, showing no sign of militarized youth culture. American women's behavior particularly astonished the prisoners. Women drove trucks for the Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, ran businesses along Main Street, and supervised male workers in defense factories. At nearby Bryan Army Airfield, part of the Women Air Force Service Pilots (WASP) program, female pilots flew military aircraft. Military records confirm WASP units operated from Bryan Field between 1943 and 1944, visible to POW work crews in surrounding areas. Churches across Robertson County invited German prisoners to attend services. Records from First Baptist Church of Hearn, First Methodist Church, and St. Mary's Catholic Church all document German POW attendance. The Hearn Democrat on December 24, 1943 reported, German prisoners attended Christmas Eve services at multiple churches, sitting among congregation members whose sons serve overseas. No incidents reported. By early 1944, the Special Projects Division of the Provost Marshal General's Office had created sophisticated educational programs at Camp Hearn. Declassified records from Record Group 389 reveal the scope of this quiet re-education effort, though prisoners only knew it as voluntary schooling. The camp library, initially stocked with 500 books donated by Hearn citizens, expanded to more than 5,000 volumes by August 1944. The American Library Association's Books for Prisoners program supplied texts including works by German authors banned by the Nazi regime. Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, Erich Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front, and works by Jewish writers such as Lion Feuchtwanger were available. A German POW could read books that would have meant death to possess in Nazi Germany. Sam Houston State Teachers College, now Sam Houston State University, offered correspondence courses. College records show that 340 German POWs enrolled between 1944 and 1945 in classes such as English, American history, mathematics, and agricultural science. Professors from the college visited Camp Herne monthly to deliver lectures and conduct examinations. The camp newspaper situation requires clarification. While Der Ruf was published at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, prisoners at Camp Herne produced their own newspaper called Der Spiegel, the Mirror, not to be confused with the later German magazine of the same name. Copies preserved at the Army Heritage and Education Center show its evolution from early editions filled with Nazi propaganda in 1943 to democratic discussions by late 1944. Declassified Special Projects Division files reveal a sophisticated psychological strategy. The program classified prisoners into three groups: anti-Nazis, about 10%, non-political prisoners, 75%, and committed Nazis, 15%. Each category received different treatment designed to encourage ideological change. Anti-Nazi prisoners, identified through careful screening that included analysis of letters, conversations, and reading habits, were given additional privileges and educational opportunities. They often became barracks leaders, discussion moderators, and newspaper editors. Their influence over the large group of non-political prisoners was deliberately encouraged and monitored. The screening process developed by Army psychologists and German immigrant advisors involved subtle tests. Prisoners' reactions to news of German defeats, their book selections from the library, participation in educational programs, and social interactions were all recorded. Weekly reports tracked ideological shifts throughout the camp population. Assistant Executive Officer Major Maxwell McKnight, whose papers are preserved at the Hoover Institution, wrote in a November 1944 report, "The transformation rate exceeds expectations. Approximately 60% of non-political prisoners show measurable movement toward democratic ideals after 6 months of exposure to American society and targeted education." Working inside American facilities exposed POWs to levels of casual abundance that felt almost like mockery of German scarcity. At the Alcoa aluminum plant in Rockdale, Texas, where POWs handled materials beginning in September 1943, workers discarded more aluminum scrap in a single day than German aircraft factories could obtain in an entire week. Plant records show German prisoners were assigned to scrap collection, giving them direct exposure to American industrial waste. Food processing plants produced the greatest psychological shock. At the Stokely Brothers Cannery in Cameron, Texas, verified through Milam County historical records as employing POWs from nearby Camp Herne, perfectly edible produce was thrown away for minor cosmetic flaws. Tomatoes slightly imperfect, underripe, corn with irregular kernels, beans with small blemishes, everything destroyed while German civilians at home faced starvation. A letter from POW Corporal Friedrich Müller, preserved in Red Cross archives, stated, "Today we destroyed hundreds of pounds of fruit because it did not meet canning standards. Fruit that would be treasure in Germany is garbage here." The American supervisor apologized to us for the waste, not realizing he was apologizing for abundance we could not imagine. Christmas 1943 at Camp Herne is thoroughly documented in local newspapers, Red Cross reports, and military files. The entire town of Herne, population about 2,000, mobilized to ensure that enemy prisoners experienced a proper Christmas celebration. Such treatment of enemies contradicted every expectation of wartime behavior. The Herne Democrat printed a full list of donations on December 23, 1943. Local churches gathered 4,800 individual gift packages. Schools contributed handmade cards and decorations. The American Legion Post 164, veterans of World War I who had once fought Germans, donated cigarettes, candy, and sports equipment to the German prisoners. The Lions Club provided musical instruments. The Garden Club decorated the camp with holly and evergreen branches. The camp Christmas tree, photographed for the newspaper, stood 30 feet tall in the central compound, covered with electric lights that remained on continuously. Quartermaster records show that the camp used more electricity for Christmas decorations than many German villages possessed for all purposes. Such an electrical display would have been unimaginable even in peacetime Germany. Local churches performed Christmas concerts in German for the prisoners. The First Methodist Church choir learned German carols phonetically. Mrs. Sarah Patterson, the choir director whose son was serving in Italy, led the performance. The emotional contradiction of American mothers singing to enemy soldiers while their own sons fought Germans overseas broke several prisoners emotionally. According to Guard reports, the Christmas feast menu preserved in quartermaster records included roast turkey, 1 pound per man, ham, candied sweet potatoes, green beans, cornbread stuffing, cranberry sauce, mince pie, apple pie, ice cream, beer for enlisted men, and California wine for officers. The meal totaled roughly 5,000 calories per person. At the same time, German civilian rations, when available, provided only about 1,200 calories per day. Working in Texas also exposed German POWs to American racial realities that contradicted both Nazi propaganda and America's own reputation. The truth, documented in military reports and local newspapers, was more complicated than either narrative suggested. At Camp Herne, black soldiers from the 359th Infantry Regiment occasionally served guard duty. German prisoners, products of Nazi racial ideology, found themselves receiving orders from African American soldiers. Several prisoners requested transfers rather than obey black guards. These requests were denied by camp administration. Lieutenant Colonel Stiles wrote in a December 1943 report, "German prisoner objections to Negro guards are noted and ignored." Yet prisoners also observed the contradictions of segregation. They could eat in Herne restaurants that refused service to the black soldiers guarding them. They could attend movie theaters where their guards were not allowed to sit in the main section. German enemies sometimes had more social freedom than American citizens who happened to be black. This paradox, being treated better than some Americans while remaining enemy prisoners, confused ideological certainty. At agricultural work sites documented in Farm Security Administration records, prisoners worked alongside Mexican American and black laborers. The efficiency of mixed-race work crews focused on tasks rather than race-challenged Nazi theories that racial purity created productivity. German POWs picked cotton beside black workers who often outperformed them, undermining assumptions of racial superiority. 3 well-documented cases illustrate the transformation of German POWs in America. Hermann Böttcher arrived at Camp Herne in June 1943 as a committed Nazi. His memoir describes a gradual collapse of ideology through accumulated observations. The decisive turning point came during Christmas 1943 when the citizens of Herne presented gifts to enemy prisoners. He wrote, "These people whose sons we had tried to kill gave us presents. Their kindness was not weakness but strength, the confidence of victors who already knew they had won not only the war but the peace that would follow." Böttcher later immigrated to the United States in 1953, became a citizen in 1958, and worked as an engineer for General Motors until retirement. Georg Gärtner escaped from Camp Deming, New Mexico, in September 1945 and lived under the assumed name Dennis Wiles for 40 years. Instead of fleeing the country, he chose to remain illegally in America, married an American woman, raised children, and worked as a tennis instructor in California. When he finally surrendered in 1985 for a television documentary, he had lived longer as an American than as a German. His story, documented in his autobiography Hitler's Last Soldier, became one of the most remarkable personal accounts of the POW experience in the United States. America validated the transformative power of American society. Reinhold Pabel escaped from Camp Washington, Illinois, in 1945, not because of mistreatment, but out of boredom and curiosity about American life. According to his memoir Enemies Are Human, he lived illegally in Chicago for 7 years, working in bookstores and marrying an American woman before voluntarily surrendering in 1953. An FBI investigation revealed he had broken no laws except illegal entry. He received American citizenship in 1959 and later became a successful businessman, eventually sponsoring other German immigrants. The German POW experience varied across America's more than 500 camps, but certain consistent patterns appeared. Camp Alva in Oklahoma specialized in agricultural training. Department of Agriculture records show German prisoners managed a 200-acre demonstration farm using American farming techniques. Prisoners learned mechanical cultivation, crop rotation, soil conservation, and hybrid seed development. These skills proved invaluable when POWs returned to the devastated German countryside after the war. The agricultural program became so successful that local farmers began hiring POW work crews at premium wages, creating competition for prisoner labor. Camp Concordia in Kansas became famous for its art program. German prisoners created murals that still exist today in the Cloud County Courthouse and several local buildings. The camp orchestra, equipped with instruments donated by Kansas communities, performed concerts for civilian audiences. The Concordia Blade newspaper reviewed these concerts positively, noting the professional quality of the musicians, even though they were enemy soldiers. Art created by prisoners later became part of permanent collections in Kansas museums. Camp Trinidad in Colorado faced unique challenges, with winter temperatures dropping to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Quartermaster records show the Army provided German prisoners with Arctic-grade clothing, insulated barracks, and increased food rations, about 4,000 calories daily during winter. Swiss Red Cross inspector André Ponchen wrote in February 1944, "German prisoners at Trinidad receive better winter provisions than Wehrmacht troops on the Eastern Front, according to prisoners' own statements." Perhaps nothing shocked German military minds more than American openness with information. Prisoners had access to American newspapers that criticized the war effort, reported production problems, and discussed strategic failures. The Special Projects Division deliberately supplied multiple news sources, understanding that exposure to a free press would weaken totalitarian thinking. Radio programs in recreation halls included commentary critical of military leadership. Comedians like Bob Hope joked about generals and politicians. Journalists such as Edward R. Murrow questioned strategies on air. Congress debated military spending publicly, with disagreements broadcast nationwide. All of this information was available even to enemy prisoners. The 1944 presidential election campaign, observed from the camps, seemed almost like democratic suicide to German military observers. President Franklin Roosevelt faced a serious challenge from Thomas Dewey while the country was still at war. Republicans openly criticized wartime policies. Newspapers printed opposition arguments. Political cartoons mocked the commander-in-chief. Yet the war effort continued, and even strengthened. This demonstration of democracy's strength through disagreement rather than uniformity fundamentally challenged authoritarian assumptions. International Red Cross inspection reports preserved in the ICRC archives in Geneva consistently rated American POW camps above Geneva Convention standards. These neutral reports provide crucial verification of conditions. Inspector Guy Metro wrote in his comprehensive August 1944 report, "American camps exceed treaty requirements in all categories. Food rations equal or surpass those of American military personnel. Medical care equals American military hospitals. Educational and recreational opportunities exceed those found in many American training facilities." Specific inspection findings from Camp Hearn included caloric intake, 3,300 to 3,800 calories daily, Geneva Convention required 2,000. Living space, 40 square feet per prisoner, Convention required 27. Medical staff, 1 doctor per 500 prisoners, Convention required 1 per 1,000. Recreation, organized sports, libraries, and educational programs, Convention required only adequate recreation. Inspector Emil Sandstrom compared American camps favorably with those in other Allied countries. Having inspected POW facilities in Canada, Britain, and Australia, I can state definitively that American camps provide superior conditions. The difference is not only material but philosophical. Americans treat prisoners as temporarily displaced persons rather than enemies. POWs working in American factories observed production methods that transformed their understanding of industrial efficiency. At the Lone Star Steel plant in Dangerfield, Texas, where prisoners from Camp Hearn worked between 1944 and 1945, monthly production exceeded the entire Ruhr Valley's annual output before Allied bombing. The secret was not only machinery but motivation. Company records show workers competing for productivity bonuses, suggesting efficiency improvements, and taking pride in their output. Production charts displayed each shift's performance like sports scores. Workers wore company pins, purchased war bonds with overtime pay, and painted bomber names onto steel destined for military aircraft. Morale drove productivity more than supervision. At Texas railroad yards where POWs loaded materials, the coordination astonished German logistics officers. The Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad employed POW labor at its Smithville yard, where prisoners observed American logistical efficiency firsthand. Trains arrived exactly on schedule. Loading equipment operated without interruption. Telegraph and telephone networks coordinated transportation across the nation. There was no single central planning committee, just capitalism organizing itself for wartime production. As Germany collapsed in the spring of 1945, American authorities began preparing prisoners for return to a devastated homeland. This preparation, documented in occupation planning files, went far beyond simple repatriation. While the War Department launched Project Paperclip for scientists, broader programs were also created to prepare ordinary POWs to help rebuild a democratic Germany. Courses in civil administration trained prisoners to manage destroyed cities. Agricultural programs focused on feeding starving populations. Medical personnel studied public health techniques for preventing epidemics. Engineers examined methods of rebuilding damaged infrastructure. The Special Projects Division identified potential democratic leaders among the prisoners and offered additional training in governance and administration. The scale of preparation appears in Provost Marshal General reports. By May 1945, 31,000 POWs were enrolled in vocational programs. Another 18,000 studied English, 12,000 participated in agricultural training, 8,500 attended technical courses, and 6,200 studied business administration. Future Marshall Plan concepts were explained to prisoners even before the program was publicly announced. State Department officials visited camps describing American intentions to rebuild Germany rather than punish it. This unexpected generosity, from victor to defeated enemy, shattered the final remnants of Nazi ideology built on racial struggle and survival of the strongest. The statistics reveal the scale of transformation. Of the 425,000 German POWs held in the United States, only 2,222 attempted escape, about 0.52%. Only 54 escapes lasted longer than 30 days, 0.01%. Confirmed sabotage incidents numbered 7, 0.001%. Work refusals totaled 178 cases, 0.04%. Meanwhile, 87% of eligible prisoners volunteered for labor programs. Postwar surveys conducted by American occupation authorities found that 74% of returning POWs held favorable views of American democracy. 61% supported Marshall Plan assistance when it was announced. 55% favored a German-American alliance. 38% expressed a desire to immigrate to the United States. 23% maintained correspondence with American families. Immigration records show that about 5,000 former POWs legally moved to the United States during the 1950s. Naturalization files indicate that 92% became citizens within the eligible timeframe. Their success rates in employment, home ownership, and absence of criminal records exceeded those of the average immigrant population. The influence of returning POWs on West Germany's reconstruction is recorded in occupation documents and German archives. Former prisoners held important positions in the new democratic system. 48 became members of the Bundestag. 312 served as mayors or city council members. 1,847 worked in agricultural modernization. 2,341 became teachers in rebuilt schools. 4,165 managed businesses using methods learned in America. Hans-Georg von Studnitz, a former POW who later became a German industrial leader, told American historians in 1965, "We returned from America with more than memories. We carried knowledge of how democracy works, how free markets function, and how different people cooperate. We had seen the future, and we knew it worked." Camp Hearn closed in December 1945, but the relationships created there endured. The Hearn Heritage League preserves letters exchanged with former prisoners over a 40-year period. Christmas cards arrived each year until the final known former prisoner died in 2001. These letters show a lasting transformation rather than a temporary influence. In 1984, on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, 50 former Camp Hearn POWs returned to Texas. The Hearn Democrat covered the reunion extensively. Former enemies embraced former guards. Wehrmacht veterans placed flowers at the American Legion Memorial. Fritz Zimmermann, speaking for the group, said, "We arrived as enemies believing in racial superiority and national destiny. We left as friends understanding that democracy's chaos is its strength, that diversity creates unity rather than weakening it." Historians have studied the German POW experience in America extensively. Arnold Kramer's Nazi Prisoners of War in America, 1979, provides comprehensive documentation. Judith Gansberg's Stalag USA, 1977, analyzes the re-education program. Antonio Thompson's Men in German Uniform, 2010, examines POW labor programs. Ron Robbins' The Barbed Wire College, 1995, details the educational transformation. These scholarly works, based on archival sources, interviews, and government records, confirm the scope and success of the transformation. The scholarly consensus is clear. American treatment of German POWs represents one of history's most successful examples of re-education through exposure rather than indoctrination. The German prisoners who arrived in America between 1943 and 1946 witnessed sights that seemed impossible within their worldview. Every casual freedom, every small kindness, every puzzling act of generosity gradually reshaped their beliefs. They expected to find a weak and divided nation. Instead, they encountered a society confident enough to show mercy to its enemies. The transformation was not achieved through propaganda but through reality itself. German POWs saw democracy functioning amid apparent chaos. They observed racial integration beginning despite segregation. They watched women exercise authority while maintaining traditional roles. They experienced enemies becoming friends through simple human contact. These unusual sights, ordinary to Americans but revolutionary to people raised in totalitarian systems, accomplished what military defeat alone could not: a complete ideological transformation. The POWs did not merely witness American power, they experienced American values. They did not simply observe democracy, they participated in it. America's greatest victory was not only on the battlefield but also inside prisoner-of-war camps, where enemies gradually became advocates simply by witnessing American life. The sights that stunned them were unusual only to eyes shaped by tyranny. To American eyes, they were simply everyday life, messy, imperfect, yet free. German POWs arrived expecting to find enemies. Instead, they found reflections of what they themselves might become. Those unexpected experiences changed not only individual prisoners but the future direction of entire nations. Within their astonished observations lay the seeds of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and the democratic reconstruction of Europe. Their transformation demonstrates that some of history's greatest victories are won not through destruction but through example. Not through propaganda, but through reality, not through hatred, but through humanity. The unexpected sights German POWs encountered in America ultimately became part of the foundation for one of history's most remarkable transformations, from enemy